Greetings, citizens. Hey you beautiful creepy human being you. Welcome to my channel and welcome to today's Morbid makeup video. I'm so happy we could meet like this. I'm so happy that somehow in all of this craziness that we talk about every single week, today you and I were able to find each other on this crazy little planet that we call home. My name is Brittany or Bratterstein, whichever you prefer, and today we're going to be discussing the absolutely horrific and pointless murders of 70-year-old Charles Severance and his wife, 70-year-old Shirley Severance. But before we get started, if you have not yet had the pleasure, please make sure to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing that bell. I put out a new video every single week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you, but I can only do that if you join the Brat Pack and become one of us. One of us, one of us, one of us. And you can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok. They're all Bratterstein, but no pressure. Now, before we get started with the story, I need to say a quick thank you from today's sponsor who makes it possible for me to put out videos as consistently as I do. And our sponsor today is Skillshare. Now, if you are not familiar with Skillshare, don't you worry. You're about to get familiar with Skillshare. Skillshare is an online learning platform where lifelong learners can go to learn skills that will benefit them for a lifetime. And if you are like me, because I don't know if you know this about me, but like, I am a lifelong learner. I'm the type of person who likes to teach myself to do everything that I possibly can, that I physically can. And Skillshare has helped me a lot with that, particularly where this channel is involved, because I don't know if you know this about me, but I do everything here myself. I research myself, I write myself, I edit myself, I film, I do everything, every single thing. Every single thing is just me, baby, and that's because of a couple things. One, I'm a control freak, and two, I'm just the type of person who has always liked to know how to do things, because relying on other people is not always the best method, because, you know, sometimes people just aren't as good as you are. You know what I mean? Outsourcing is not my thing, so I try to learn every single thing I can, and Skillshare has helped me do that a lot, especially in the last year. It's really helped me a lot. So if you're anything like me, you will love Skillshare too, because it's an online learning community that offers thousands of classes to a community of members across 150 countries. And they offer these classes in a variety of subjects, from classes on things like yoga, parenting tools, which have come in clutch for me recently, or what I find to be the most useful for my current situation, tons and tons of classes on video editing, photography, social media, all the things that I do be doing on the regular. Recently, I started taking this new class called Instagram Reels for Beginners, and it's taught by Corrine Foster Williams and bro. I have really been enjoying it because it teaches you how to make some like bomb Instagram Reels and teaches you why they were important and talks about how they work with the algorithm and all that jazz. And I've mentioned before, that is a sickness that I am down with and that I need to get better at, because I suck at social media, because I'm a dinosaur woman, if not in my age, definitely in my brain. So I need the youths and those with the information to tell me what to do here. Help me help myself. Thank you. So that's just one of the reasons that I find Skillshare to be so beneficial to my life. And if you were to become a Skillshare member as well, you would have access to a multitude of different classes on pretty much any subject that your heart desires. Every time I want something, I'm like, let me just see if Skillshare's got something. Like if I'm curious about something, I'm like, let me just see if I can learn about it real quick. And they always do, because there's just so many different classes. And the best part for me, besides like obviously the abundance of information that one can learn, is that you can do it at your own pace. You don't have to be in a class at a certain time. You literally just go and learn when you have time to do so. And as a new mom who works full-time and babies full-time, it's my time slots for learning are at very weird times and inconsistent days. You know what I mean? It's kind of like when the tiny boss gives me a chance to have a little bit of me time and doesn't want to be just like stuck to my face and giving me all the kisses. That is when I do my classes. So being able to have flexibility and work at my own pace is very, very important. So I'm also bringing you good news today. Skillshare is offering the first 1,000 members of the Brat Pack, you guys, us, this group of people on this channel. They're offering the first 1,000 members of the Brat Pack the opportunity to peruse all the things that Skillshare has to offer. All you have to do is click the link at the top of my description box in order to access that. So if you're like me and you want to join a community of rad lifelong learners who can learn skills that will benefit them for a lifetime, make sure to click the link at the top of my description box, because the first 1,000 members of the Brat Pack to do so will get 1 month free to peruse all the classes that Skillshare has to offer today. With that said, I just want to say one last thank you to Skillshare for partnering with me on today's video and making it possible for me to produce so many videos as consistently as I do. And of course, I want to thank you guys for hanging out with me and always being so supportive of all of my sponsors. You rock. Okay? Don't ever change. All right, now that I'm done spreading the good word of Skillshare, we can go ahead and get into this video. Now, today I'm bringing you a video out of Sterling, Colorado. And I was thinking about it when I was like typing my notes. We've been doing a lot of Colorado cases, right? Maybe it's just like the word Colorado sticks out in my head, but I feel like a lot of cases I've covered have been in Colorado, and it makes me wonder, like, are you guys okay over there? Are you safe? Do you feel safe? Because my friends, literally, we had Friendsgiving last week, and my best friend was like, let's all move to Colorado, you know, start a compound, live on a big piece of land, all of us together, all of us adults, all of us kids. You know how you and your friends talk. And we actually are all talking about moving to the same state at some point. You know, and he was like, how about we throw Colorado in the mix? And now I'm like, do I want to go to Colorado? Everything bad seems to be happening over in Colorado. Anyways, this is a case that I had never heard of before. This seems to be the theme recently. I'm learning about all new cases. I don't even know how I came upon this one. I really don't, because it wasn't a subscriber suggestion. It's just something that I stumbled upon while perusing the interwebs. And man, it is so messed up. And so I went on YouTube to see if anybody had covered it yet, because, you know, I like to do lesser known cases, and no coverage. And I was like, how? Because it's so wild. And every single thing I read, I was just like, you know, I could not stop reading it. So I have looked into so much information. So now I can come and bring it to you all in one concise place. Here. I did all the work, so you don't have to. So today I'm going to tell you that whole story. And while I do, I'm going to be putting on a full face of makeup, hence the makeup and Morbid makeup. Now, if that's not really your thing, that's cool. Thanks for hanging out this long. I hope you find a channel that gives you this information in a way that you prefer. But if you're on the fence, maybe stick around. You could be surprised by how much you like me. And I actually don't do very many true crime and makeup videos anymore. So if this isn't your thing, just check back next week, because it probably is just regular true crime narration. And now, real quick, at the end of this video, after I've given you all the information, I want you to answer the question of the day. And I'm going to kind of give it to you now so you can rattle it around in your head as we go. But wait until you have all the information to come to a conclusion, okay? The question of the day is this. Do you think these sentences that were given to Shirley and Charles's murderers were justice? Let me know your thoughts down below at the end of this video. And now that I've said all of the things, come, gather around, and let me tell you the story of the horrible murders of Charles and Shirley Severance. All right, to get started, let's jump in our handy-dandy time machine and head to 2014 in Sterling, Colorado. Sterling, Colorado is a small city on Colorado's rural northeastern plains, which is about 110 miles away from Denver, if you are curious about said location. It's May of 2014, and police are responding to a call on 3rd Street, and this house, they're responding to a call that is at this house. So they show up at this house, and it's adorable. It's this little white house with a little picket fence out front, little like metal butterflies stuck to the, like, what is that, crosshatch lattice? Yeah, lattice. Little butterflies stuck to the lattice, a bird feeder, and a little sign on the fence out front that simply said the Severances, which was the last name of the couple that lived inside, 70-year-old Charles Severance and 70-year-old Shirley Severance, who had lived there for over 30 years. Now, this call came in from the couple's adult grandson. This was a guy named Brendan Johnson, and he basically called the police and said that he needed some medical assistance for his grandfather. So when police arrived, they pulled up, police, medical, all that jazz, as they do. And immediately they noticed from outside a really terrible smell. And the first officer on the scene, this was Officer Dolan, said he immediately recognized the smell as the smell of death. Now, when police entered the home, they found the decomposing body of 70-year-old Charles Roger Severance, who went by Roger. So I'll probably be bouncing back and forth between Charles and Roger during this video in terms of what I call him, because I know myself and that's probably how it'll be. So if you're like, who's Roger? Who's Charles? It's the same person. I'm going to say that now. And it appeared immediately, like on the surface, to be what they call an unattended death, which essentially just means that somebody has died in their home. Usually, well, I wouldn't say it's usually an older person, but I would imagine it's generally an older person, because like it's more common for just older people to just die than younger people, but I could be wrong. I'm just speaking out of turn, I guess. But basically, it's when somebody dies in their home. and they are unattended, right? Unattended death. So they aren't found for a little bit of time, right? And this would make sense because Roger's grandson, the one who found him and called the police, said that he had been away on vacation and had just gotten back. And when he got back, he found his grandfather the way he did. Now, while investigating the death of Charles, they realize that something is off here. And that is that Charles is married. Charles has a wife named Shirley, who is also 70 years old, and she is nowhere to be found. Now, immediately, police believed that something was right. Something about this scene just wasn't sitting quite right with them. So they immediately launched an extensive investigation into the death of Charles and an extensive search for Shirley. Right? Cool. And the autopsy for Charles was scheduled for the next day. But they did make sure, the police, they did a press conference to let the public know that, like, this seemed like an isolated incident. It didn't seem like there was any sort of safety concern? Yeah, sure. Safety concern for the public. Like, everything was cool. Baby, don't look over here. Stay cool, honey bun. Everything is chill. Right? That was the vibes they were giving off. Like, yes, this person was killed and this person was missing, but like, this has nothing to do with you, so don't worry, guys. It's cool. We have it. We got this. Shirley Severance was described to the public as being 5'5" and 140 pounds with brown hair and brown eyes. And basically, the police were just saying that they were trying to find her because they wanted to ensure that she was cool because of what had happened to her husband. They just wanted to look into her well-being, right? So they start going around, they start going to all the local businesses, places that she might have gone, just trying to see if they had any information, if they had seen her, any clue on where she could have gone. And they showed everyone they came in contact with her, like, ID photo, like, hey, have you seen this one? Have you seen this man? Have you seen this woman? Deadpool. Have you seen this woman? And they weren't coming up with any leads. Family members started sharing this photo of Shirley around too, just trying to see if anyone might have seen her, because, you know, it's not unheard of for sometimes older people to sort of wander, you know what I mean? Like, we hear of that happening. I don't know if that's what they were thinking, but that's what I was first thinking, and they were sharing her photo being like, hey, has anyone seen her? We're really concerned for her safety because, like, her husband was found dead and he had clearly been there a while and she's gone. And the family car's still there. Not like she would have driven off anyway, because I guess Shirley didn't drive, which, girl, same, but, because I don't drive. If you don't know that, I don't drive. But anyway, she's just gone, right? Obviously. Suddenly, I was awake. And no one seemed to know where she was. Like, are you not going to see, is no one going to see this 70-year-old woman just migrating down the street by herself? You know, they were like, this doesn't make any sense. Now, Charles's autopsy was performed. And though there were no obvious signs of trauma, right? So they didn't have to worry. That's not right. That's not correct. Well, that is correct, but I don't know what I'm trying to say. Basically, Charles had his autopsy performed, and there were no outward signs of trauma. But this didn't alleviate the police's fear that something might have gone wrong with Shirley, because by the time his autopsy was performed, she was still missing, and it had at least been missing since Charles had died, right? So they released another statement to the public after Charles's autopsy, saying, and I quote, "We remain concerned for the welfare and safety of Mrs. Severance." My voice broke there. I'm filming very early in the morning, which I never do. I woke up before the worm, which is my baby. My baby is the worm. And my mouth and my throat don't want to cooperate, so I'm sorry if it sounds bad. I will try to drink some more water. And by water, I mean iced coffee, to lubricate the situation. So, in investigating the disappearance of Shirley and the murder of Charles, police find something kind of interesting. They find that there were some recent checks written from Charles's account to their grandson, Brendan Johnson. And this totaled like $4,500, which is a pretty penny, right? It's not a little bit of money. So they're like, huh, that's a little bit interesting. When I say like they were recently written, they were written like right at the time that Charles would have died. So they are like, maybe we should ask Brendan about this. So they bring him in and they question him. And he's like, oh yeah, my grandpa wrote me those checks. He gave it to me. He had been saving some money for me. He also gave me some cash. He had been giving me this money because he knew I wanted to go to a concert in May with my girlfriend Cassandra. And so he gave it to me, and that was all she wrote. Like, that's the whole story. And they're like, that's interesting. That's interesting. story that no one is here to confirm but you. But okay, sounds good, sounds good, sounds good. They didn't think it sounded good. Spoiler alert. So police obtain copies of these checks so that they can look into them, because they're kind of thinking that they should investigate them and see if maybe a little bit of forgery is involved. That's kind of what they're feeling at this point. And they also say, okay, maybe we should also talk to this young man's girlfriend, Cassandra, since he brought her into the mix. Now, by mentioning her when it comes to going to this concert. Now, the specifics of what was said. Yes, great. The specifics of what was said between Cassandra and police isn't clear. It's not out there. But basically what came from it is that she did tell police that she believed that those checks that Brendan had, he had written himself and signed his grandfather's name, which we were like, ooh, that's not good. But when she was questioned about Shirley specifically, like everyone else, she said she had no idea where Shirley was. So some good came out of it. Some interest came out of it, but not anything that helped them find Shirley. Now, the remains of Shirley would be found shortly thereafter, but they would not be found in a good way. The remains of Shirley Severance were found in the first week of June of 2014, and they were found in 2 separate locations. They were actually found in 2 separate states, but the states were only 30 miles away, so it wasn't like a super far drive, but they were found in 2 different locations. And once she was discovered, her autopsy was scheduled to take place 2 days later. Now, how did police find Shirley's body? Well, they were told where to find Shirley's body. And at the same time that this confession came in, 2 people were arrested for the death of Shirley Severance, as well as her husband, Charles Severance. And these 2 people were asked to give polygraph tests. To take polygraph tests. Yes. Now, I'm sure this is going to absolutely blow your mind and you did not see this coming at all, but the 2 people arrested for Shirley and Charles's murder were their grandson, the same grandson who had called the police and reported that his grandfather needed medical assistance. This was 19-year-old Brendan Lee Johnson, and the second person arrested was his girlfriend, 18-year-old Cassandra Rieb. Both of them were from Sterling, just like the Severances, obviously, and they were being held at Logan County Jail on charges of first-degree murder, aggravated robbery, and theft, all felonies, and Brendan was also facing 2 counts of forgery. And I know that's a lot of charges. There was also a chance of the crimes against them being enhanced because of the crime against an at-risk adult being added, both of them, which would have been like a sentence enhancer, which is why they would be enhanced. Once what had happened and who was responsible was revealed to the public, one of Shirley and Charles's neighbors said of them, and I quote, "To know they're going to spend the rest of their lives in prison, I mean, that's just sad. I just can't believe it." End quote. Now, how did we get here? When I used to know you so well. So basically what happened is a few days after the murders, police brought Brendan in for questioning, basically, like when they spoke to Cassandra, and she had been like, yeah, I think he forged those checks. He was like, not he, they, police, were like, maybe we should talk to this guy, because that, on top of the fact that they already felt weird about him and already felt weird about the scene, made them think like, this is somebody worth talking to. So they brought him in, and it seemed like their gut instinct on him was definitely spot on, because shortly into the interrogation, Brendan made a confession. But it was kind of like a bullshit confession, and he definitely tried to distance himself from accountability. Basically, Brendan's first story was that he had come home one day to find his grandmother, Shirley, violently shaking his grandfather, Charles, and that in response, he grabbed a knife and stabbed Shirley in the back. A fight ensued, and Shirley ended up dead. Like, that was the first thing he said. And police were like, and I'm sure you're like, that sounds kind of far-fetched, that kind of sounds like bullshit, but that's the story he was going with. Until he learned from police that his girlfriend Cassandra was also in the station, and she was talking. And as soon as he learned that, he changed his story. And when I say he changed it in a big way. Now, he was saying that these murders were totally premeditated and committed not just by him, but by his girlfriend Cassandra as well. He said that the two had been planning the murders for at least 3 weeks before they committed them, and that the reason they were doing it is because he believed that he would get an inheritance from his grandfather and grandmother for $20,000, and their house, which was valued at $47,000. So him and Cassandra went out and bought gloves and other supplies, and their plan was basically this. They were going to break into the house, and they were both going to smother his grandparents to death in their beds so that it looked like natural causes because they were older people. And basically he had the task of smothering Roger, and Cassandra had the task of smothering Shirley. They were going to tag team the 70-year-old couple while they slept so that they could get some money. Which sidebar? Okay, so he thought he was going to get an inheritance of $20,000, which really, in the grand scheme of life, isn't that much money. I mean, don't get me wrong. If somebody just handed me $20,000 all at once, I would be like, holy fuck, my broke ass would be stoked. But to kill your grandparents for $20,000 and a house? Come on, okay. And assume that he was right? Because I haven't seen it confirmed that he was going to get this inheritance, but let's say that he was right and they had put him in his will so that he would get this inheritance and he would get this house. That means that these people loved you, bro. They loved you enough to put you in their will, to give you their money, everything they had saved up, and their house, and you kill them for it? You kill your grandparents for money and a house. These grandparents who loved you enough to let you live with them. You ungrateful little fuck. Anyways, police confirm with Cassandra that this, what Brendan's saying, this whole plan to smother them in their beds and that she was in on it, she confirmed that this was true. She confirmed that they were going to murder his grandparents for a house and money. I just can't. She said specifically of this, and I quote, "Together we went and we did it together. We agreed to do it together, obviously. Like one get one and one get the other." She added during her polygraph, quote, "The plan was to kill them so he could get their inheritance." So she was very much corroborating his awful story. So on May 20th, the two entered the Severance's home in the middle of the night, dressed in dark clothing with their smothering plan on their mind. But things went wrong, and in the worst possible way. As soon as they started to attack this older couple, they found that Charles was awake and able to fight back. So Brendan and Charles started to fight. They started to struggle, and it resulted in them falling out of the bed. Like both of them like rumble tumble falling out of the bed, with Charles on top of Brendan. So Brendan said that at that point he reached up and started strangling his grandfather, who was on top of him. And in the midst of strangling him, he had a change of heart. And before he could stop, like he had a change of heart, he was about to stop strangling him. Good choices. His grandfather then collapsed. It was at this point that Brendan then went to help Cassandra because she was having trouble of her own. So basically what happened is that Shirley was sleeping on her stomach at the time that she was attacked, because again, these assholes attacked a elderly couple in their beds as they slept. And since she was on her stomach, Cassandra was having trouble smothering her. So Shirley, agile, started to fight them back. So she was in the midst of fighting Shirley while Brendan is like fighting Charles. It's just a whole fucking mess. Eventually, the fight between the three of them at this point stopped for a second, like calmed for a second, and Brendan decided that he would, be merciful and let his grandmother have a drink of water. This whole scene, when I picture it, breaks my heart. So he lets her get a drink of water, and as she is there with her guard down, leaning over the sink, drinking from the faucet, he decides this is the perfect time to attack her, and he tries to cut her throat, but misses and cuts her in the chin. It's at this point that she panics, she fucking freaks out, and she tries to run for it, and she actually gets out of the house, and they had this like lattice on the front, like on their porch basically, and she gets out and she grabs a hold of that, but they get her before she can get far enough away, and they rip her back in the house, and in the process she like breaks a piece of this lattice off. Brendan and Cassandra then dragged Shirley back into the house, and she's just standing there like frantic and crying, offering them anything they want, offering them money, offering them the contents of her safe. And she asked her grandson, like, "Why are you doing this to me?" And he responded in a way that's just so chilling to me, and he said, "You know why." It was at this point that Shirley offered them the combination of her safe, anything to spare her life. And they must have accepted this or told her, yeah, sure, go ahead and get it for us. Because as she had her back to them and she bent over to try to open the safe, the two decided to ambush her. And they stabbed her over and over before taking a nylon cord and strangling this woman to death. The two then put Shirley and Charles's bodies back in their bed so that they could clean up the scene because things had not gone the way that they wanted, you know. So they put them in their beds and they leave them there until the following night so that they can take the day to like clean and do whatever it is that they were going to do. And once they were done and they were ready to start trying to hide the bodies, right, like hide what they had done, they take Shirley and they drive her to the Pruitt Reservoir, which is a place, okay? Once they got her there, they tried to dismember her. They said that they tried to, quote, hack off an arm and a leg before putting her in a fire pit and setting her body on fire, okay? And they said that they had planned to do this to both Charles and Shirley, but that in death, Charles was too heavy to move. I truly cannot imagine how a person does something like this. How do you look at your grandmother and then try to cut off her arms and her legs and douse her in gasoline and set her on fire? I love my grandma so much. I cannot fathom this. I can't. It's just disgusting. The two ended up coming back to the scene a couple of days later because they started thinking that the place where they had left Shirley wasn't good enough. Not that it wasn't good enough as like a final resting place to respect her and her dignity and all that, but they were worried that they might get caught. So they go back to try to retrieve her, and when they get there are people there camping, so they aren't able to do it. And I can only imagine the amount of anxiety these two must have had in getting there and seeing people camping and wondering if she was going to be found and they were going to be caught. I'm glad that they were probably very stressed for a time because they are assholes. So they went back a couple of days later on May 28th and they dug up her body, which I forgot to mention, they buried a portion of her body. So they dug it up and then they transported her to Nebraska to put her in the much better hiding spot, which they determined in their infinite wisdom was thrown along the side of the road in some weeds. So a much better hiding spot if you ask them. They then wrote the checks from Charles's account to Brendan, you know, the stolen forged checks. They forged the checks, they signed his name. They stole his truck, okay, the man that they killed. They stole his truck and then went and left for 9 days, just having some fun with Charles's truck and Charles's money before coming back and 9 days later and reporting the unattended death. I just really can't believe that people do the things that they do. Sometimes I'm sitting here and I'm just like, what am I talking about? And this is one of those moments because they literally killed these people. Wrote like forged checks. They forged $4,500 in his checks. So that was what was so important, to take $4,500, stole his truck, and then went and drove to Denver to go to a concert, by the way. And on the way, they're like, let's just get rid of a little bit of my grandma's body. You know, let's take care of all that. And it's like, how? How do you do something like that? And then to just tell police, oh yeah, like he gave me the money and he loaned me the truck, because that's what he said when he was first questioned. It's like, sir, come on. And I also just need to know, I feel like compelled to know, like, what concert did they go to? I want to know what was so important, but I couldn't find that information. If you know, if you're local, what concert did these assholes go to? Because my inquiring minds want to know. So anyways, the officer who's hearing this confession, because all this is coming out in a confession, right? Well, this was actually one of the first officers at the scene when they went to check out Charles's unattended death. You remember the officer who smelled the death from outside, Officer Nolan, where he's the one who's getting this confession. And he's like, I can only imagine. And like, I picture, so stupid. I pictured that scene in Talladega Nights after Jean Girard does his whole spiel about his German Shepherds and his husband, and the two anchors are just like, that's how I feel that Officer Nolan was. If you don't know that reference, I'm so sorry, but that's what I picture. And he was like, okay, can you please now lead me to these remains? So he and some other officers go with Brendan, and they go to the reservoir where he shows them the fire pit, and then he also takes them to the second location where they recover her burned torso and head. Now, who were these people? And like, what the fuck? And the problem is there isn't a ton of information on who all these people were, which sometimes happens in these cases, especially when they're ones that are lesser known, like there's less interviews or like less interest in interviewing, and it's sad, but I couldn't find a ton of information. I found little to nothing on Brendan, a little more on Cassandra, and even less on Shirley and Charles, which was really like a bummer for me. Because, I really like to humanize these people when we're talking about them because they were more than just how they died. But unfortunately in this situation, there isn't that much that I can bring here. Basically, all I could find on Charles is that he was born in Washington on April 1st, 1944, and his parents' names were Leonore and Charles, so he was a junior, presumably. I guess he could have been like a third or whatever, but his papa's name was Charles as well. And I found that he worked at a beef plant for 30 years. Like, he worked there a really long time before it closed down, and that he retired in 2009, just 5 years before he would sadly be murdered by his grandson. I also found that when he was younger, he enjoyed fishing and softball, but that in his older years, he was all about gardening, which I think is precious. You know how that happens as you get older, your just interests change. I know in just the last 10 years, everything I'm interested in has changed. And one thing about him that really destroyed my heart is that he was survived by his mother. So his mother, he was 70, his mother was still alive when he was killed. And I cannot even imagine what that would be like. Oh my God. Now Shirley, she was born in Nebraska on September 29th, 1943, and she was born to parents Wilbur and Elma. And her and Charles met and got married in, I believe it was 1964. And when they got together, she had lots of jobs throughout her life, but once they got together and, they had kids and stuff, she became a homemaker. That was what she chose to do with her life, which is arguably one of the hardest jobs in the world, so good for her. And she must have been a feisty woman in her life because her sister Norma, after all of this happened, she said that Shirley was outspoken and opinionated, and that Norma knew that her sister would put up a fight, and that was the only thing about this case that did not surprise her. And this poor woman too, she found out about her sister being missing. She found out about Shirley going missing on Facebook, just like in Alicia McPhail's case. If you haven't seen that one, it's really horrible. The little girl's mom found out that she was missing and dead on Facebook, and it just destroys me. But I guess when it happened, Brendan's mom Facebook messaged her and was like, listen, there's no easy way to say this, but my father is dead and my mother is missing. And that was her sister. And that's just I can't imagine receiving a message like that on Facebook of all places. It makes me ugh. And after learning that it was Brendan and his girlfriend who had killed her sister, she called the two young and selfish. Now, these two young and selfish ass fucks, let's talk about who they were. And most of this information that I was able to get, I actually got from an interview with Cassandra's mom. So basically she said that Brendan and Cassandra had known each other for a long time. I guess since they were pretty young, because Brendan had been friends with Cassandra's brother, and that made him, sort of friends with her as well, but they didn't get closer until middle school, and that's when they first started dating, but it didn't work out because they were children, but they stayed friends, obviously. So since they stayed friends after that, he was often around. He was often at their house. He would come over, he would watch TV, he would have dinner at their table, it was a very, her mom said that she doesn't know if she had blinders on to the relationship or if things could look different in hindsight, but to her, he seemed like a nice kid, and their friendship relationship throughout the years seemed to be just typical. She said there weren't any red flags to her, even looking back on it later. She said that Brendan and Cassandra just seemed like typical teenagers, that they hung out, they watched movies, they played video games, they went out to eat, they worked. Just nothing about them stood out to her at all. Brendan and Cassandra both do also have Facebook pages, which I was able to sort of look at, though both of their pages are private. Brendan's page is almost completely private. He just has a header photo of this wolf's face, and it says that wolves don't care about the opinions of sheep, is what it said, something along those lines. I can't remember the exact quote. And again, most of his page is private after that. The only other thing I was able to see is that it said that he and Cassandra started their relationship in 2014, which is the same year as the murders, but it's also possible that it was that's when he made his Facebook page. I don't really know, but that's what it said. As far as Cassandra goes, she has a couple of photos of herself that were public, which I'll include throughout the video. And she also had posted a lot of photos of basically like space, like colorful space theme. If you know, you know, you've seen these kind of photos before. She posted a lot of those. And she put that she worked at Walmart and that she started going to, I believe, some sort of college in 2014. Both of them, by the time of the murders, had completed school. Brendan, I believe, graduated and then he moved in with his grandparents. And Cassandra actually dropped out of conventional school, but did like an online course to get her diploma by day and worked at Walmart by night. As far as criminal records, Brendan had like a little record. He had been arrested and served a little bit of time for a third possession charge, I guess, like a minor possession charge. But Cassandra had no criminal record at all. Cassandra was actually said to have like a lot going for her at the time that these murders took place. But the opinion, okay, the vibe that I got from things that I read from Brandon's prior possession charge is I think that both of these, you know, individuals, these people, these young adults had drug issues. Put this together from things that we'll talk about later, context clues, things like that. But it seems like they had drug issues and that this might have played into some of their decision making. Not like that's an excuse at all, because many people have drug issues and do not murder people. So like there's no sympathy in that regard for me. And we've talked about my opinion on drugs. I'm not going to get into it in every video where we discuss it, but I think that that has something, I think that that plays a factor into who these people were at this time. Not an excuse though, just an explanation. Friends who knew both Cassandra and Brendan, like, you know, peers, fellow youths, said that they were polar opposites, that Cassandra was like studious and popular and that Brendan was just a bully, and that it was likely that he had made Cassandra do whatever they did, or that she had, quote, followed him, basically, followed his lead. And this is a thing that people say kind of often in this, is that she probably was following him, doing what he said. But here's the thing. There's a special kind of person that can be led into murdering another person. Because I will say this, I don't believe that I could be led to do such a thing. I don't think that somebody could be like, we should do this. And I'd be like, okay, you said so, so let's go do it. Like, you know what I mean? So I hate that excuse. It's like, okay. But she was still like the type that could be led to murder, and that is on her. You know what I mean? I think you know what I mean. Cassandra's mother, Leanne, said that she noticed her daughter started having issues around, like, changing, turning into a different person around her senior year of high school. This is when she seemingly lost all interest in school. And before that, she was like a good student and it was something she was into. But she just started kind of wandering, seemed to be having some stuff going on. And at the time, her mom thought that it was solely drug related, which again, this is why I get the drug vibe from the whole situation. But she learned over time that she was also having relationship issues as well. Cassandra was. She said that Brendan was not good to her daughter Cassie Cassandra, just in case, like, obviously you're not dumb. She said that Brendan wasn't good to Cassie, and that she believes that his treatment of her led to her change, her lack of interest in things that she once loved, and her depression, basically. She said that the two started dating again, because remember, they had been dating when they were younger, and then separated and then stayed friends. She said they started dating again around her senior year, and that as soon as they started dating, things between the two moved very fast. Leanne said that at this point, she really tried to, like, be there for her daughter, still be, like, a mom, even though Cassandra was technically an adult. But Cassandra did live at home with her mom. But the problem was that she couldn't really be there face-to-face with her very often, because Cassandra worked nights and she worked days. But she said in hindsight, she wished she could have. Obviously, hindsight is 20/20. But she wished that she could have been there more for her daughter and been there more emotionally and had gotten her the counseling that she didn't know that Cassandra needed, clearly. You can't even imagine how that feels. Like, you've got to feel like partially responsible when things like this happen, when it's your kids, even if they are adults when they do it. And even though at that point, like, it's not really her responsibility to be watching her adult child and to try to get her counseling and things like that. I guess some people might think it is, but they just kept missing each other, you know? They didn't see each other as much. She was worried that Cassandra was going to move out, so she was trying to also give her space, but it's just one of those things where when things like this happen, you're always going to wonder, like, what you could have done differently, and it's just sad that she has to feel this way because of something her kid did, you know? She said of raising her children, and I quote, "I trusted my children. I thought I raised them to do the right thing. You want to think by the time they're teenagers, older teenagers, they know right from wrong. they'll make mistakes. That's how they learn. You know what's really wild about this particular case and Cassandra's mother in general is I guess when the murders took place, she was at the Sterling Fire Department and she heard the call come in. Now, I didn't see it expressly stated anywhere that she worked at the fire department, but like, why else would she be there? So I'm going to guess that she worked there. And she said she heard the call come in as a code black, which means like a death. And she felt, for whatever reason, compelled to look up the address. And I guess this wasn't something she generally did, but on this occasion she did. And she looked it up and she didn't recognize it or anything, but so she went about her day. And that later she received a text from her daughter about an hour later saying that she was at the police department. But again, she didn't connect the dots between this address and her daughter. And then once she learned that the code death she had heard, how it was related to Brendan and therefore was, you know, close to her family, she said she just felt scared, that she felt scared for Shirley because of her like older age. She was worried that she might have just like left the house and got disoriented and lost. And this is something that I guess she had a fear of because it had happened to her uncle before. So she has all these thoughts like swirling around in her head and she has no idea that her daughter's even involved until a couple days later when police show up at her house with her daughter in handcuffs and a warrant. And she says that she was just so confused and that she even questions if Cassie like wanted to be involved or if she was forced because it was just so out of character for her. She was the type of girl who like helped her with like going and caring for people, like care duties. I don't really know exactly what that is, but she also said that she was the type of girl who was really careful when she rode her bike places because she didn't want to accidentally run over a June bug. Like she was said to be a very gentle person. She said that when they came with the warrant, they gathered like everything on Cassie, everything they could find, every document, every possession, report cards, medical records, anything and everything that could identify who Cassie was. And I guess during this time, Cassie like whispered in her mom's ear that she was involved in Brendan's grandparents' murders. And she like, I can't even imagine what her mom felt like at that moment, but she hugged her daughter to say goodbye. And this would be the last time she'd be able to hug her daughter for a year. So now that we've gone over like who everyone is, all the players, and gone through all that backstory, let's get back to the arrest. So once they were arrested and put before a judge, the judge actually barred them, which was interesting, from harassment or retaliation of witnesses, which I don't know who the witnesses would have been, but I thought that was interesting. And the DA Brittany, we'll call her Miss Brittany. Miss Brittany, same, I'm also Miss Brittany. But anyway, DA Miss Brittany asked the judge to not let them have contact with each other, and the judge granted that as well. And then they were held without bond while they awaited trial. During the hearings, Cassandra had like a lot of people who cared for her and a lot of people who were there for her. I guess they like really filled up the rows, the benches, the seats, whatever they're called in a courtroom. And I guess during one of the hearings, one of her family members even like yelled out, like, Cassie, we love you, like yelled out and got scolded by the judge because I guess that's like a big no-no. So Brendan's attorney actually tried to get the charges for Roger's death dropped against Brendan because basically what they were saying is that there was no proof that Brendan's attack is what killed Roger / Charles Roger, and that he could have instead died of a pre-existing condition. They were saying that he probably died of a heart attack, but like I would argue that he wouldn't have had a heart attack if his grandson hadn't attacked him in his bed and choked him to the point that he started convulsing and stopped breathing. But that's just my take on it. And the judge seemed to agree because the judge was like, well, I think it's up for the jury to decide if he was responsible. So we're gonna just lean with it and rock with it if you do not mind, sir, ma'am, attorney, person. With that, his attorney entered Brendan's plea as not guilty and said, like, listen, we're going to be looking into his mental competency, basically. That's going to be our defense, because that's what everyone does. Brendan's attorney also tried to argue that he should get bond, but Miss Brittany was like, listen, DA Brittany, she was like, listen, I cannot think of a more dangerous person for you to let back out onto the street, so I would suggest you don't do that. And I guess the court agreed. They said that the evidence against Brendan was strong enough to show that he posed a threat to the public because of what he had done, and that he was also a flight risk, so they denied him bond. Which, in my opinion, good, because how the fuck are you going to attack two 70-year-old people in their beds? It makes me so mad when I think of that, because my Gammy, my grandma, is my favorite person. I love her so much. Me and my husband, before we had my baby and got so busy, we used to go and see her so much. It's less now, and we need to be better now that we can. It's a long story. It doesn't matter. But basically, I love her so much, and to imagine these people living this much life, 70 years, and making it, considering there's so many ways a person can die. They made it 70 years, and to be taken out like this, to be attacked by your grandson and murdered, is so messed up. Whenever I hear cases about elder abuse or elder murder, it makes me so mad. Like when I think of those sisters in the Richard Ramirez case, if you know, you know, Oh my God, it makes me so angry. And then, oh my God, so when I was researching this case, there was a forum, you know, where people can post about cases that are going on and like local cases and things like that. And some stupid idiot was like, oh, maybe these old people were like grumpy old fucks, blah, 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 and basically defending these murderers and condemning the victims. And I'm like, when I read that, I was just like, fuck right the fuck off, you demon. Anyways, the DA in this case, Miss Brittany, she was going after the death penalty for both Cassandra and Brendan, which they are young, right? So that's pretty scary to consider with young people, but at the same time, look at what they did. And apparently Cassandra even said that she didn't even feel bad about murdering somebody. So, a demon. Now, apparently Brendan's mother, Jill Johnson, who was put in an awkward position from the beginning because she was actually Shirley and Roger's daughter and Brendan's mom, so she had a unique relationship because she was related to both the victims and the perpetrator. And I guess she told the DA that her recommendation was that Brendan and Cassandra both get life in prison. She was expressly against the death penalty, which it's really complicated. I can't imagine being in that situation. But she told the DA, like, I am against this, but she didn't try to fight Miss Brittany on going after the death penalty. She was just like, listen, I don't like it, but I'm not going to fight you on it. She did, however, start a Facebook page that was called Saving My Son Death Penalty, I believe. Yeah, and on that page she would post like anti-death penalty posts and basically was just trying to like voice her opinion on that, not just in her son's case, but other cases. The page has since been taken down. I went to look for it, but when it was still active, she made a post that said, and I quote, "New chapter, saving my son. Most of you have been Facebook friends with me since June 2nd, when our lives took a drastic, sorrow-filled turn. Some of you are new friends that are unaware of my family story and perhaps only know of it from newspaper/television articles. To summarize, my son and his then girlfriend confessed to murdering my parents. In early September, the DA announced that she was going to seek the death penalty for my son Brendan and his then girlfriend. Although I will never understand, condone, or accept what has happened, I have now come out of my fog and realized that if I don't start trying to do something, I may lose my son, and I'm doing nothing about it. All during this, I have tried to post things to my Facebook page to live out loud, as some friends and family have called it. I still plan to do that. However, I have decided to create a separate Facebook page for it to allow others to post to it if they have articles, feelings, websites to share. If you are interested or would like to be part, please like this page. Thanks again for all of your prayers, support, friendship, and love. It has helped to bring us along and keep going. My love and big hugs to all of you." End quote. And I don't know. She's in a really shitty situation. I cannot imagine being in the situation she's in. To have your parents, the people who raised you and loved you, who you loved, be murdered by your son, your baby, and have to come to terms with the fact that it was your child who did it. And to picture like this little baby that you loved more than anything, who you stayed up all night with when they couldn't sleep because they were teething, and you cuddled because all they wanted was to be close to you, and let them sleep on your chest because they wouldn't sleep in their bed, and then celebrated when they started to roll over, like all of those things, to know that this person who you made murdered your parents. That's an unimaginable thing. It's a very tough situation to be in, and I do not envy her. But moving on, I guess the defense in this case, when they were doing jury selection, he compared this case to the Aurora, Colorado shooting case, the movie theater shooting case, where James Holmes went and shot up the movie theater. I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but basically what he was saying is that the notoriety of the Severance case, at least in the area that they were in, he was implying that it would make it difficult for them to get an impartial jury. I didn't see if they ended up getting a change of venue, which I believe is what this article was talking about. It didn't state that it was done, so if you are from the area and you know, please let me know. But I just found it interesting that he compared this case to the James Holmes murders, which basically, if you don't know about that case, James Holmes went into a movie theater in 2012 when it was the premiere of the Dark Knight Rises movie and just opened fire on the whole theater of people, and he killed a lot of people. And I did do a video on it. It's one of like I hate mass shootings. They really fuck me up a little bit. So it's one of the saddest ones I've ever done. But if you want to see it, I would suggest watching it. And basically this happened in Colorado, just not far from where this case takes place, at least in the same state. And it happened just 2 years prior to the Severance murders. But I don't know. He's implying that they are similar in notoriety, but I would argue that that's not true because I had heard of the James Holmes case, right? I had heard of it like, as soon as it happened, it broke everywhere. It was national news, but I did not hear about this case. But that could just be my experience. I don't know. Let me know if you've heard of this case, but I hadn't. Now, the case against Brendan took an abrupt turn when he changed his plea seemingly out of nowhere. Because if you recall, he had initially pled not guilty to the 14 charges against him, and his attorney was planning to, do a defense based on his mental competency. Well, out of nowhere, seemingly, this guy changed his mind, changed his plea when he entered a plea deal with the prosecution. Basically, what it came down to is he was going to agree to plead guilty to the first-degree murder of his grandmother, Shirley Severance, but in exchange, all of the other charges against him would be dropped, including the charge of the murder against his grandfather. And in exchange for this, Miss Brittany, the DA, would pull the death penalty off the table. She would no longer pursue that. But in exchange for his plea, he would get life in prison with no possibility of parole. Before accepting this agreement, because it is such that's life in prison with no parole, the judge did speak with Brendan and went through a series of questions to determine that he was competent to make this decision of life in prison without parole. And at the start, Brendan admitted to the judge, he was like, hey, I am nervous as all get out, but otherwise I'm fine. And the judge said that his mother testified at an earlier hearing that she believed her son was very smart and could have gotten A's and B's in school if he had just tried. And Brendan, though he had dropped out in 11th grade, he had earned a GED, and he agreed that if he had not done drugs, he could have been a successful student. So basically what they were saying is, though he didn't do well in school, it's because he didn't apply himself, not because he wasn't smart or was not competent. It was determined that he was smart, and sane. I don't know how smart he was because of, doing some dumbass shit, but he was said to be of above average intelligence, which doesn't it seem like everyone is said to be of above average intelligence, but also it seems like no one is even at average intelligence. So what is average intelligence? That's what I'd like to know. Anyways, basically what it came down to is they determined that he understood the rights he was waiving, and that he was waiving his rights to a jury trial and also waiving his right to appeal later. The judge said that he needed to drive home the point that, quote, a life sentence is not a pleasant thing, end quote. The judge was like, listen, I know you've been in jail since you were arrested for this crime, but jail is nothing like prison, quote, except that there are bars and people telling you what to do 24/7, end quote. He was like, you won't get to choose the prison you go to, you won't get to choose your cellmate, and you'll probably get put into a prison job and you don't have control over that either. And also, you'll probably be approached by people in prison who say that they can help you legally and that they can get your sentence overthrown on a technicality. All of these things might come up, but you need to understand, but that is not going to work in your case because of the type of plea you're making. You are in there for life, bro. Miss Brittany, who had been going after the death penalty, said in this case she did think that she always felt like Brendan getting life would have been justice, and that what she saw as true justice would be giving Brendan the opportunity to live. And she said specifically that if she didn't think this was justice, she would have gone harder for the death penalty, but that she did believe that this was the right move. Which I'm kind of like, if you felt like the death penalty would have been too harsh and real justice would have been life, why were you going so hard for the death penalty for young people? But that was what she said after the fact. She also added that pursuing the death penalty needed to be done in the interest of justice, and stated that she did not seek that type of sentence lightly and believed that this deal is just because he'll never be able to hurt anybody again. And additionally, the plea deal would save taxpayers the expense of an appeals process, which is triggered automatically in a death sentence. But she did say she was still going to go after the death penalty for Cassandra at the time, so I don't know. Now, I guess technically during the entering of his plea, they could have just sentenced him right there, but both the defense and the prosecution requested of the judge the same thing, which I think is probably rare. I don't really know. But they requested that the sentencing hearing be pushed because Brendan's mother wasn't there, and she wanted to be there when her son was actually sentenced, so that hearing was pushed. Now, around this time, while all this is happening with Brendan, we haven't even talked about Cassandra. So she's entered a plea of not guilty. She's trying to say that she wasn't guilty of any of the charges, and her attorney said that they were going to be looking into additional factors for her, including her mental competency. Duh. So now we're going to fast forward to April of 2015. Cassandra's in jail awaiting trial, and Brendan is now going to his sentencing hearing. Why did my throat do that? Now, before Brendan was led from the courtroom to begin serving his sentence, his mother, Jill Johnson, addressed the court. She was reading from a statement that she had prepared in advance, and she basically said that her and Brendan's father were having a lot of trouble accepting what he had done, accepting that he had murdered her parents, and that though they do not excuse or accept his behavior, and they do believe he should be punished, and though they are glad that the death penalty was taken off the table because they really didn't want that, they did not believe that sending a 20-year-old to jail, because he was 20 by this time, for the rest of his life was a victory for anyone. She went on to call her son's the plea deal he accepted, a, quote, selfless act because he was sparing the family the pain of a trial. Which I don't know if that's why he did it or if he was just really like, I'm going to die, but that was her opinion on it, her take on it. His defense attorney also spoke on his behalf, saying that Brendan was too emotional to address the court himself. And he said that he actually seemed to really like Brendan. I don't know if this is common. I haven't read about this in a lot of cases, but his attorney was like, listen, in all of the 40 years that I have been a defense attorney, I have never been prouder to represent a defendant. He added that Brendan had gone through a big change in prison or in jail while he awaited his, transfer to prison, and that now that he had time to sober up, he had come to terms with what he did, and he was filled with regret and remorse. In handing down Brendan's sentence, the judge said that he felt, quote, no pleasure in imposing a life sentence without parole. He called it unfortunate that Brendan would miss out on, quote, the things free Americans enjoy, end quote, such as getting a job or someday holding a grandchild, hopefully a grandchild that would not have grown up to murder him. He didn't say that. I say that. But he did add that Brendan had stolen the life of his grandmother and that therefore his punishment was fair and just. He then offered 3 hopes for Brendan: that he will be of use to his new community that he will now be forced to be a part of, that he will find forgiveness from his family, and that he would find forgiveness from God, because then he would truly be free. The judge then left the courtroom, and Brendan's family was left to stand there, cry, and hug. Now, Cassandra. In May of 2015, she was set to have a status conference, which basically they'd just be going and discussing how things were proceeding, the trial, etc., etc. These happen a lot in cases. Status conferences, they are a thing. Anyways, everyone was taken aback, blown away when, boom, Shyamalan twist, this status conference became a sentencing hearing when Cassandra, like Brendan, entered in a plea agreement. Cassandra pled guilty to 2 charges, the second-degree murder charge for Charles Roger Severance, so at least he got some justice, because I was pissed off when it came to Brendan, and then a first-degree assault with a deadly weapon on an at-risk victim, which resulted in the death of 70-year-old Shirley Severance. So they're like, you didn't kill her, but you kind of killed her. You know what I mean? It was adjacent. The DA, Miss Brittany, told the court that basically Cassandra had not inflicted any of the final blows, the fatal blows on either Charles or Shirley, though she had tried, and that the whole idea was Brendan's, basically. Even though text messages and Facebook messages showed that Cassandra was pretty on board with the whole situation, the DA argued, or said that it could be argued, how serious Cassandra was about the whole thing. But I would argue that Cassandra was pretty serious about the whole thing, since she literally went through with it. Miss Brittany tried to say that it was Brendan who had something to gain because it was his grandparents, he'd get the money, he was the greater of all evils. But Cassandra, if she had nothing to gain, that's even worse. But I think she did have something to gain since she was dating Brendan, and she probably felt like she could have had some of that money and maybe lived in that house. But DA Miss Brittany basically was trying to put the whole thing on Brendan, or at least most of the blame on Brendan, which, maybe he was the mastermind, right? She said that he had committed the most serious of mortal sins by killing his own family members, and that Cassandra didn't even have any connection to the Severances, which I would argue is maybe worse for a person to just go out and kill 2 people when you have no connection and you have nothing to gain, which is basically what they were going with, you have no connection, you have nothing to gain, da 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 da. But I think that that's somehow scarier. But I would also argue that she probably thought she did have something to gain because she was dating Brendan. So if he got that money in that house, she probably thought she'd get a little something from that as well. But let's say she didn't think that, which I doubt. I'm sure she thought that, but let's just say that she didn't think she was going to gain from this. So going out and murdering your grandparents for money in a house, that's cold-blooded. But going out and murdering 2 people because of nothing, because your boyfriend says so, and thinking you're going to get nothing out of that, that's a different kind of evil. Her defense attorney tried to address the court and make her, paint paint Cassandra in a good light, saying that they did many, many interviews in the process of investigating the case, and everyone they spoke to basically had the same sentiment about Cassandra, and that's that she was a good girl. She was a good girl who was good in school, extracurricular activities, had a bright future ahead of her, all of that jazz. Cassandra was, quote, on her way to a bright future, end quote, her attorney said. But like her potential was also said to, quote, pale in comparison to the monstrous acts that are deserving of the greatest condemnation we as a community can impose. Now, sure, their interviews showed that she had been mostly seen as a, quote, good girl, but it also showed that in the months before the murder, Cassandra had changed a lot. She made a drastic change in a short amount of time. The once honor student dropped out of school, started using drugs every day, and her attorney described what she was going through as a downward spiral. Her attorney said that she was imperfect and damaged, and then basically tried to blame the whole thing on drugs, saying that while under the influence, she did some things that she probably, well, they didn't say probably, that she did some things that normally she would never do, which is probably true. I wouldn't imagine, well, I don't know her. Maybe she would have. I don't know. I do think drugs make people do things they wouldn't normally do, but that doesn't mean that they're not accountable for the things that they do. Especially when murdering a person is the thing that you've done. Her attorney also said that, basically said that the plea agreement they made proved that justice can be mercy. Justice can be mercy. And that the attorney, were happy that the death penalty was taken off the table. Jesus, I can't talk, for both Cassandra and Brendan, and said this attorney too was like, I'm proud to have served, to have worked with Cassandra, and their hope for Cassandra was that she would leave prison older and wiser. Now Jill, Shirley and Charles's daughter, Brendan's mother, she said that she didn't really agree with what the prosecution was doing with Cassandra now, because she felt that Cassandra should have gotten the same sentence that her son got, but the DA disagreed. The DA said that this is a really hard line to draw as a mother and as a victim, but that her job as the DA was to balance justice and what was right, and that wasn't an easy thing to do, and that everyone's going to have an opinion on how the sentencing should go, but it's her job to actually determine what it should be. Miss Brittany said that basically Cassandra took part in every single thing that Brendan did, but that, like Brendan, she was also cooperative with police and even helped lead police to Shirley's remains. And that though these sentences are technically different, the outcome is basically the same. DA Brittany said that Cassandra, quote, must be punished for these terrible murders, and ultimately she was sentenced to consecutive terms of 48 years and 32 years, totaling 80 years, followed by 5 years of mandatory parole. And in exchange, the 13 original counts were dropped, along with another charge that she got while in prison, a contraband charge that she got while she was in jail, because I guess she still couldn't stay out of trouble. And it appears that generally it is customary for her to have to serve 75% of her sentence before being eligible for parole, but that the Department of Corrections may not honor that mandate, but that she will still likely have to serve at least 65% of her 80 years, which means if she does ever get out on parole, she will be elderly. Actually, I did the math, and she will be just a little bit older than Shirley was when she was murdered by Cassandra and Brendan. In accepting the plea, the judge spoke about the main point of this case, the murder of two innocent people for literally no reason. And the judge said that though many people had been affected by what these two had done, it would be a disservice to the victims' memories if they weren't the central focus of the decisions being made. Cassandra then addressed the court herself, apologizing to everybody, apologizing to the victims, apologizing to her family, apologizing to Jill Johnson, Brenda's mother, Shirley and Charles's daughter, and then emotionally, expressed her regret and her remorse and said that she hoped she could be forgiven one day. She also said that she knows that by taking this plea deal and by being offered this plea deal, she's being given a second chance, and that she intends not to waste it and hopes that she can do, she hopes that she can contribute to the world with the life she was given as a gift. And then she looked at her parents and she told them it was not her fault. And the DA said of looking at the two outcomes of the case overall, Brendan's sentencing and Cassandra's sentencing, she said, quote, "This is justice." Now, there isn't a lot of information on Brendan's family out there. I looked and I didn't see many reports. I did see one that said that Jill Johnson wasn't really doing interviews and she didn't really want to, talk about it with the media, which is totally understandable. I 100% get it. And I think part of the reason that there isn't as much coverage, like people coming out and talking about the victims and the perpetrators, is just because cases from smaller areas don't tend to get as much coverage. You know what I mean? Like if it doesn't bleed, it doesn't lead, which is crazy to me because like I would feel like this is something people would talk about because of how horrific it is. But you know, the media picks and chooses who they find to be important to talk about, which is really sad. But there just wasn't that much information out there for me to bring to you. The most information I got on the backstory on Cassandra and Brendan was from, again, Cassandra's mother. And this poor woman, she just said that like, she thinks she's in denial. And she says she has a lot of questions, but she doesn't know if she wants the answers to them. I did find one thing she said to be, I think, useful and a good thing to end this video on, because I think it's like the takeaway from this sort of case. And she basically said that parents need to be involved with their children. Deeply, deeply involved. She said it's not always comfortable, but it's the best way to keep your child out of danger. And she said that sometimes you have to play the bad parent in order to keep your kids out of trouble. She said, quote, oftentimes parenting is a battle of wills, the teenager versus the parent, end quote. And she said that parents just need to be aggressively involved in their children's lives, even if their children dislike the attention. And she said specifically of this, and I quote, no matter how much you trust your children, you still need to be in their business. You do. You need to suck it up and fight with your children. And with that quote, that, my friends, is the story of the murders of Shirley and Charles Severance. And now, considering everything I've told you today, I want to revisit the question of the day, and that is this. Do you believe that the sentences for Brendan and Cassandra for the murders of Shirley and Charles were justice? Let me know all your thoughts in the comments below. But anyways, guys, that completes this video. I hope you found it interesting and informative, and it gave you all the information you would want when looking into this case. And of course, thank you for remembering Shirley and Charles with me today. Please, before you leave, don't forget to let me know down below of any cases you'd like to see me cover in the future. As you know, I have a long list of cases, and every time you leave a suggestion, I put it on the list with your name next to it to give you a shout out if I used your suggestion, because I know you're filled with good ideas and good taste. Otherwise, you would not be here. And I love looking into the cases that you suggest, specifically your hometown cases. I've been really enjoying covering those lately because they're often smaller cases that deserve more coverage. So please let me know down below if you have any of those as well. If you haven't already, please don't forget to join the Brat Pack by subscribing and ringing the bell. I put out a new video every single week, and I would love to hang out with you. Yes, you, specifically you. If you want to hang out more consistently, all my social media is listed down below, along with a link to my merch store, which this is one of my merch shirts. It's everyone's favorite. It's my favorite too. Well, it's one of my favorites. There's also a link to my membership if you want to join, where you get early access to non-sponsored videos, polls, things like that. I want to say one more thank you to Skillshare for sponsoring today's video and making it possible for me to upload as consistently as I do. And a big thank you to you guys for always being so supportive of all of my sponsors. You rock. Don't ever change. And now, with all of that said, I just want to thank you for being here when you could literally be anywhere else in the world. That is tight. You are tight. Please stay safe and be a better person than you were yesterday, and I hope to see you in my next video. Bye.